Thank you very much, Guillaume. I'm truly honored to be here as the only English speaker, and I was asked to talk slowly and calmly, which I will try to do. Also, if I get excited and go fast, then raise your hand and I'll try to slow down again. But I do want to point out that if I accelerate and you start not understanding me, that is exactly the experience I have when I'm trying to understand French people speaking. So some of you might be wondering why I am here in Paris, even though I don't speak French very well yet, working on it. So yeah, that might be wondering what brings us here. We moved to Paris last December, and the answer to that is, of course, love, or more particularly my wife. My wife, Armin Briegel, started last year at the Institut Pasteur as a research professor. This is her standing in front of one of the electron microscopes that she and her lab uses. It's a 300 kilo electron volt cryo-EM microscope, and with that they can do near atomic resolution for 3 angstrom. Here is an example of a bacterial phage that they've reconstructed in 3D from their pictures. And if you didn't understand half of that, now you know how everybody else feels when we talk about our work. But I thought that was just a pretty impressive thing. So each of those colored things is an enzyme, and they can basically place all of the atoms. This is a bacterial phage or a bacterial virus. But now back to topic. I'm a senior consulting engineer at Jamf, and we have released a tool. It started out as a tool that we wanted to have and that we wanted to use in our own team, because as consulting engineers, we often work very closely with customers, especially big, complicated customers, on projects. And yeah, we were using enrollment tools, and we didn't like any of the enrollment tools that were out there. I'll talk about that in more detail later. And we released a tool that we had been working on ourselves because we wanted to have it. I'm the one who's presenting this today, but this tool is really a team effort, and I have to stress that, with several consulting engineers involved in this. Misha van der Bend also made it very, very possible that we could do this within Jamf and then publish it as a tool and release it, even though it's an internal project. Rob Potvin gave a lot of feedback, and Anthony Dallo, he gave the feedback that makes it work with Jamf School as well as Jamf Pro, because most of us are very Jamf Pro minded, but he always had the no, this has to work in education. And some great things came out of that. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So it's a team effort. It's not just me, though I'm presenting today. It was published under something called Jamf Concepts, which I'd like to introduce. You go to concepts.jamf.com, very easy. And that has a whole list of different projects that were created not by our developers, not that our developers don't create great stuff, but they have different priorities and focuses. The stuff on Jamf Concepts was presented or created by field engineers. So mostly system engineers, consulting engineers, professional services engineers like Laurent, that work closely with the customers and therefore have very practical ideas what thing needs to be done. Some of them are barely more than really cool shell scripts, and some of them are really good and great and complex apps and workflows. Jamf Compliance Editor is another example of something that is in concept, and the return to service workflow or app. So check concepts out. It's not just Setup Manager, there's other things. The main goal of Setup Manager was that we were starting to think about enrollment workflows. I said that earlier. We were using a lot of enrollment workflows ourselves, deploying them with customers. And we thought, like, this should be easier. This should be better. This should look nicer. There's a few ways of solving this, of course. The classic experience, and I really like this, is you just deploy the Mac. You enroll it. The user creates the user account. They end up on the desktop or wallpaper. And then they see this, which is Nothing. Everything happens in the background, right? The apps may or may not be there. They do get slowly installed in the background. And yeah, if you have a really thin deployment with very few apps, that actually works quite well. But as soon as you have more than 3 or 4 apps, you probably want something better than that. We have something built into self-service in Jamf Pro. Both the old self-service and the new self-service Plus has the macOS onboarding. The nice thing about macOS onboarding is it's just a few clicks in the web interface of Jamf Pro, and then when self-service launches for the first time, it works through the list of applications and policies that you have checked to run during macOS onboarding. You get a nice progress. You introduce the user to self-service, which I think is a good thing, always a good thing, introduce them to self-service. And it goes through the installations, and when it is done, it switches to the standard self-service. This is very easy to set up, but it has a few downsides that I'll get into a bit later. Like everything that runs in user space, there's a few downsides to this. And then there's depnotify, which has been around for a long time. Depnotify started out as a tool that Joel Rennick and Josh Weisenbacher wrote while they were at Orchid and Grove, while they were also working on Nomad. Jamf acquired their company, turned Nomad into Jamf Connect. And depnotify was maintained for a while, but quite honestly, for the last few years, nobody has felt responsible for depnotify anymore. If you are using depnotify, you should start looking for alternatives, because no one's going to ever update that. I'm very much afraid. And hey, here I am with an alternative. The thing about depnotify is that it is a shell script, basically. Depnotify is an app like Swift Dialog that Guillaume showed earlier that I can control with a shell script. And depnotify as well is an app that I can control with a shell script. The core logic is in a shell script. And I have to edit shell scripts if you want to adapt it to yours. And if you make mistakes in shell scripts and you're not very experienced with that, they can be really hard to debug and figure out what's going wrong. Since we were rethinking the idea of an enrollment tool, we didn't just want to do what everybody does, but we wanted to rethink the general idea. And we see that there are 2 main strategies for enrolling Macs. The first one is what Apple and also Jamf likes to call zero touch, which is a bit of a marketing cheat, I think, because there's a lot of touching. It's just not by the IT department, right? We send the device to the end user unpacks. They get the first device, the first unboxing experience, which is really cool, we have to admit that. And then they go through the setup experience, however we as the admins have configured that. Apple Business Manager, automated device enrollment, whatever we do, and then they can create their account and start working. So that's the zero-touch experience, the one that Apple really likes to push, and we at Jamf too, and we like it. There's a great place for this. The other one that we see, though, is the tech-driven enrollment, or what we jokingly started calling single touch, but we're using that now. It's definitely single touch. The idea for single touch is the device gets shipped to the IT department or a tech. The tech takes the machine out of the box, runs through a first installment, then puts it back in the box, maybe with some extra stickers and stuff, and hands it over to the user or sends it to the user. And they can then open the box, open the machine, create their user account, and start working immediately. They don't have to wait for all the installations anymore. There's another thing behind the single touch, so it saves a lot of time for the user, not necessarily for the tech, but the tech can do 10, 12, 20 machines at once, depending on their setup. And generally, techs aren't as well paid as, say, developers or other people who work with that, with a computer. It's still a good out-of-the-box experience. We can have the security tools and all the compliance rules in place before the user even touches the device. So the device is secure before the user is there. And we can build a workflow, and I've seen this a lot, where people who try to do this workflow, they have to get the credentials from the user or they set them to a temporary password, which gets reset later. And we've built a single touch workflow that doesn't require the user to share or reset their credentials. So both have a place in any organization. If you're a big enough organization, you're probably using a mix of both. You will use single touch for your VIPs, white glove treatment. And we think like, well, maybe that's worth it for all your people. But you still need zero touch. It also has a place because people work in remote offices or even very remote locations. And you have to have a flexible workflow that is able to switch quickly or able to manage both. Another thing we thought about was the deployment order. The classical tools like dep notify, set up your Mac, Octory, they walk through the Apple setup assistant, through the enrollment, the other settings that you have, the user account creation, which requires user interaction and the user credentials. And then the user gets to the desktop and they're all excited about the new machine. And the first thing we do is we lock the desktop and say, oh, you have to wait. We are installing important stuff. You have to wait. We think that's not a good user interaction. And we thought, what if we could use a tool to move that earlier? The earliest we can act is right after enrollment, right? Before the user or tech clicks that enroll, s'inscrire, I saw that, button, we don't have control as the management service. But as soon as the user clicks that button, we can take over. And maybe we should start installing stuff right then and there. And then when that's done, the user goes through these standard things, creates their account, and when they get to the desktop, the software is there, they can start working. There's a warning here, I'll talk about that later in the slides, I'll mention this. If Setup Manager runs before a user account is created, it runs in machine space. We cannot affect or change or preset settings in user space. That requires some rethinking. If you take a dep notify or Octory or set up your Mac workflow and adapt it for Setup Manager, there will be steps in there, I promise, that you have to somehow coordinate later in user space. Not that hard, they're usually not that many. They usually go so quickly, like setting the dock, setting the desktop picture, that you don't need a progress bar for them. But you have to remember that this doesn't work until later. This is what it looks like. Yes, it's in French. Setup Manager is localized in 10 languages, and French is one of them. And if you find any typos, those are all on me. And let me know and I can fix them. But so we got to the enroll screen on Mac OS, and as soon as I click that, the enrollment process starts, configuration profiles come done, the pre-stage packages come down. Setup Manager is a pre-stage package. It launches itself, and when it launches itself, it pops up over Setup Assistant and covers it.
So typo here.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Good. We're in beta. These are easy to fix before I release. Now I lost my thread. Thank you very much. No, that's okay. So Setup Manager covers up Setup Assistant. It starts the actions that you give it. All the configuration is done in a configuration profile. You don't have to edit a script. You're editing a configuration profile. It starts working through all of its actions. You can customize the look and feel to match your branding, the icon, the colors. All the icons for these steps can be switched out. There's a network, which you saw had a white colored text, which was hardly legible, another bug in the current beta that I'm going to fix later this week. There's a à propos de ce Mac, which shows the user or the tech enough information to identify the Mac, which can be useful. If you hold down the Option key, you get even more information, which is great for debugging. And once it works its way through that, we're a bit slow on this here. I will accelerate this. So this is what it looks like. We have certain parts in here. So the icon can be switched out and customized. The title can be switched out, customized, and localized. So if you are covering an international company and you have people, users with many languages, you can also localize your customized text. All the text that's built into Setup Manager is localized by default. You can localize your customized text. The banner can be an image or a solid color. Also customizable, or you can leave it out. Looks good sometimes. You have a bit of a message here. You only get 3 lines, so be short there. And then you have a list of actions. Mostly these would be Jamf Pro policies, but they can also be shell scripts, Installator, or you can wait for a Mac App Store or VPP or Jamf App Installer app to be installed. We have the About This Mac with some information. Hold down the Option key for more information, but there's a few great things in here. I also like it shows the elapsed time. So if you're with a user on the phone and you can tell them, how long has this been going on? And they will say, oh, for hours and hours. And you're like, well, look there and tell me what it says. Yes. It shows the download speed. If especially a user is doing this in the home office, that will influence how long things take. If they tell you they have 30 megabits download speed because they're doing this at Starbucks or somewhere, well, yeah, that might take a while longer. This is the network overview. This is really nice. We also introduced at Jamf something called Network Relay as part of our Secure Internet, or ZTNA, which uses Apple's Network Relay technology for a secure device-based channel to certain resources or your private internet. And this will pick that up. This can be deployed at enrollment, and Setup Manager will pick that up and show you the status, and also if you can connect to certain resources. It's nice for debugging. Most users won't want to see this, but if you're debugging network challenges during enrollment, this is a really great help. So you need the PKG installer. You can get that from the repository. It works with Jamf Pro or Jamf School. You need a test computer. We're testing automated enrollment here. Setup Manager can also run with user-initiated enrollment. We know that's always a backup you need to have because not all devices can be an Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. But our main goal is to work with automated device enrollment. So you need a hardware to test it. Automated device enrollment does not work in virtual machines on Apple Silicon, which is a shame. File feedback to Apple, please. You create a pre-stage, you add the package and a Setup Manager profile. And if you're using Jamf Connect login, that needs to be part of the process as well, but that's optional. You don't have to use Jamf Connect login with Setup Manager. This is the repo. You can get to it at jamf.it/setupmanager. I will repeat that URL at the end. Some people have difficulty because they don't use GitHub. The downloads are under the releases area, and that's where you can find the latest version. This is an old screenshot. The latest version is 1.3.1, and we have a 1.4 beta that's going on right now. Most of the screenshots are from the beta, which is why there's typos. That's my excuse, at least. In the profile, you can build the profile by hand, editing the plist, or there's a web UI in Jamf Pro, or you can use iMazing Profile Editor, which also knows about Setup Manager, which is really great. These are the most important keys. Title, icon, message, banner, and background. I showed those earlier. Therefore, customizing and branding it. Enrollment actions contains a list of things it needs to do, very similar to the list of things to do that you had in the dep notify script. You can configure user entry, so Setup Manager can prompt for certain fields like an asset tag or department building. You say what happens at the end when Setup Manager is done. Do you just want to continue, or do you want to restart or even shut down? And there's a debug key that you can set to true which allows you to repeatedly run Setup Manager, and it won't actually do anything, which is great for testing how it looks, which you will spend some time on. Yeah, as I said, in the Jamf applications area, under applications and custom settings, Setup Manager is an option, and then you can use it, assemble that in the Jamf UI, or you can edit the plist completely by hand. And then you do it on a test computer with hardware. We've been working on this. It's been publicly available for nearly 2 years now. But these are the updates we did just this year. So this is something we're actively working on. It's not something that we threw out there and forgot. Setup Manager 1.2 came out in March. Great thing we added was webhooks. So Setup Manager can ping a webhook server at start and when it finishes, and it sends out a JSON blob with lots of great information, like how long did it go? Did any of the actions fail? What's the serial number of this device? So you can find it in your Jamf Pro. There are predefined webhooks for Slack and Teams, so you get a message in Slack or Teams, which is nice. Or you can just send it to Power Automate or Torque or some other middleware and do some interesting stuff with that. We're working with some partners on great things. Another thing we added in 1.2, which I really liked, is you can hit the spacebar while Setup Manager is running, and you will get a scannable barcode with a serial number. Again, something that partners gave us for tech-driven enrollment. They want the tech to scan all the barcodes, and if they're on the box, they're on the boxes from Apple, but they're on the boxes with the MAC address and the Bluetooth MAC address, and they're very small, and then you have to keep track of which computer is which box. And it's also on the computer, but it's so tiny. I can't read that anymore. 1.3 came out in July. I'm very proud of that. That was a very selfish addition, actually, because I was helping so many people deploy Setup Manager, and when they had trouble, I had to tell them, like, oh, I want the Setup Manager log, the install.log, the jamf.log, and maybe some more logs. And I said, well, maybe Setup Manager can do that for me and pull the interesting things out of install.log and jamf.log and the network state and write that into its own log. So I have one file and I can see what's going on during enrollment. And that's what Setup Manager 1.3 does. And it's really great. We've debugged so many enrollment problems, and we are actually working with the team who does the Jamf binary and the Jamf Pro enrollment workflow from things we have learned from this since then to improve the Jamf Pro enrollment workflow and make it more stable. It also writes to the unified system log, so if you have tools that gather the unified system log and upload that to a SIEM or something, that will work too. It shows the network connection, and it also logs if the network goes down. We added Polish localization. We get localizations from volunteers, so yeah, there's already French in there, but corrections are obviously needed. We'll see. This is what the log window looks like. You can hit Command L while Setup Manager is running to see the log window, but it also writes it to a file that you can take and send to me later, and I will tell you what's going on. Setup Manager 1.4 is in beta since 2 or 3 weeks. I've been traveling a lot, but the next few weeks we'll be catching up with the typos and bug reports for the beta. The main thing is we updated the UI. It fits into Tahoe with a liquid glass. We added things like the banner image. In addition to the logging, it also logs configuration profiles being installed or removed during the enrollment process. Because if you, for example, install a Wi-Fi profile, your network will go down for a few seconds while it switches to the new Wi-Fi. And if that happens while something else is downloading, well, that download will just cancel, and things might not be installing like you'd like them to, which can be really annoying. There's a few things that aren't setup manager features. They're features of Apple's device management protocols, either DDM or MDM. They're features of Jamf Pro or Jamf School, but I do like to mention them because they work really well together with Setup Manager. And I'm going to do something that's quite unusual, because usually we talk about things that are new and exciting, but usually this goes like this, right? Apple introduces something at WWDC in the summer. In the fall, it ships, but it only works on the latest version. So there's one feature in here, Platform SSO. Well, the feature of Platform SSO that I'm showing only works with macOS 26. Your fleet in September isn't on macOS 26 yet. You might have some of them, but most of them aren't. And it will probably take half a year or a year for the fleet to be on macOS 26, and by then you've forgotten about the new great features. And then some 2 years later or something, somebody comes along and says, why aren't you using X? Because it's really great. This is me saying, why aren't you using this? Auto Advance is one. Most of these don't just work on macOS, they work on different versions, different platforms as well. So Auto Advance actually started out at as tvOS. It also works on Vision OS and in macOS. This is one of the oldest since Big Sur. If you connect the Mac to Ethernet, you need a dongle for MacBooks, and have Auto Advance enabled, it will click through all of the panes in Setup Assistant automatically. The most frustrating thing is you have to wait 60 seconds for it to start. You have to listen to the macOS has a built-in screen reader called VoiceOver, or the French equivalent. And if you touch the mouse or keyboard, it says, oh, somebody touched the mouse or keyboard. I'm not doing anything. No more Auto Advance for you, which is really frustrating when you're testing it. But this allows us to do completely hands-off deployments. This is especially cool for classrooms, but also for some tech-driven deployments where we're working with partners. This is really cool. And it works with Setup Manager. That works great. Minimum OS version was introduced in macOS 14. Didn't act. Oh, this is what it looked like. So we can set in the pre-stage that the Mac must have a minimum OS version before it enrolls. Then if the user or tag hits enroll, the device picks that up and says, oh yeah, I have to upgrade to, in this case, 26.0 before I can even enroll. It will do the process. So it will download, prepare, do the 2 or 3 restarts necessary for the enrollment. And yes, it always says 5 minutes remaining. It's always a lie. But then it goes into the black Apple screen and does the update. And once it comes out of the update, it basically starts over, but on the new OS. We did a full upgrade here. You can limit it to say, go to the latest version of macOS 15 if you're on macOS 15, or go to the latest version of macOS 26 if you're on macOS 26. And here we're basically starting over. The device isn't enrolled yet. It's updated to the required version, but it's not enrolled yet. And we hit enroll here and the process starts over. So that is when Setup Manager or whatever else you're using might kick in. Apple introduced this with macOS Sonoma 14. Didn't really work until 14.4. Sometimes it pays off to wait with new features. But since macOS 15 and now with macOS 26, it's actually really working well. And if you're not using this yet for new devices that come in, it's really, really helpful.
Think about having a caching server before you do that.
Yeah, I have that here on the list. The caching server really helps with the download speed. It only helps with the download speed. The installation time is the installation time. But a caching server really helps here. I have one in my home office, and it really helps there because I test all the time. You can choose whether you want to go to the latest measure or stay on the macOS 15 or macOS 14, just get the latest update for that. It won't pick, if you have an old device that doesn't support macOS 26, it won't try to upgrade to macOS 26, even if the other instructions say that. Or you can say, go to a specific version. I want you on 15.6 for some reason, why ever you could say that. They won't downgrade, they will only upgrade. It works with auto advance, that's pretty amazing. It will auto advance on the old OS and then do the update and then auto advance through the new OS. It's very slow, but it works. File Vault, File Vault isn't new. What's new is since macOS 14, we can have a File Vault configured in pre-stage and Setup Assistant takes care of it for us. This is the only thing that the user sees, and you can even choose to suppress this screen in macOS 26, which is nice. It's configured with a configuration profile, and the big advantage is the user doesn't have to approve File Vault, and the user doesn't need an extra logout or restart to enable File Vault. It just gets enabled during Setup Assistant. The recovery key will by default be shown to the user. That is optional. We can suppress that. It will also be scrolled up to the Jamf Pro or Jamf School server. This has been available since macOS 14. I know that many customers aren't using it yet. If you're not using this yet, you really should switch from any old method to enable File Vault that you're using to this. The only exception is Jamf Connect login, because Jamf Connect login doesn't use Setup Assistant. Jamf Connect login has its own workflow for this. This is the new thing. This is new this year. Mark talked about it earlier with regards to Jamf, Microsoft Entra. Apple introduced for macOS 26 this summer a simplified version that we can enable platform SSO at enrollment. And the good thing is, we at Jamf have been working with Okta to make this work. Throughout the beta phase, we were working on this, and like 1 week before Octane and 10 days before JNUC, we made it work. This is a workflow where we're combining Setup Manager with the new platform SSO. So just to show, this works. It didn't break. I was very relieved. We have a very minimal Jamf setup here running in Setup Manager during pre-stage. And when that finishes, we accelerated it a bit. It doesn't drop to the standard user creation screen. It drops to something new. This is Platform SSO at enrollment with Okta Verify. So this is the Okta part taking over a piece of Setup Assistant. This is where I enter my identity credentials, username and password. It's a test setup, obviously, very long username and password. This is where the device is registered with the identity provider, and the user account will be set up in the next screen. You can see all the fields are grayed out because it uses the credentials. There is an option in Apple's framework to get the user image from the identity. That's not implemented yet with Okta either. Now we've created the user account. We're in user space. We're not finished with setting up Platform SSO yet, because we have the second factor authentication. However you configure that in your IDP, we chose to use a push notification here. And the next part is it connects the account, the Okta account, with Touch ID, so that going forward I can authenticate to Okta Verify with Touch ID. Now we end up at the desktop. We're opening Safari, using another new feature in macOS 26, Managed Bookmarks. We're going to the Okta main page. The Okta authentication kicks in to get to that page. Because this is the first time, we have to say, allow this, and we can use Touch ID to authenticate to the page. We get the SSO token, and we are logged in. And we only had to enter the password once in the entire workflow, which is pretty cool and useful. Okta Verify has this available right now. It takes some setup, and Mathieu is here somewhere. He knows all the details. He can explain it to you in French too. I can explain it to you in English. It requires to install the profile and the app at enrollment. You authenticate. Basically, you can't pass the enrollment without having credentials, We had a discussion about that earlier. It creates the local user from the identity, and from then on the normal SSO behavior kicks in, and the local user and the identity stay synchronized. Okta Verify has this available. Microsoft has announced that they will have this in Q1 2026 for Entra with Company Portal. So these are some things that work really well together with Setup Manager, but even if you're not using Setup Manager, consider using these for your enrollments where appropriate. I think they make things very much smoother. So Setup Manager works in pre-provisioning workflows, the single-touch workflows, and highly regulated organizations, financial industry, really like the fact that we can lay down all the security and compliance before the user even touches the device. But we also see it used a lot in education, where you want to automate the enrollment and installation process as much as possible. I talked at the very beginning about machine space versus user space. Setup Manager runs in the machine space. And there's some things in user space that we can't do. Some of them just because the user account doesn't exist yet when Setup Manager runs, so we have to do them later. But there's also things where Apple says, yeah, these are so critical, the user has to approve them. The user has to be aware of them, like setting the default browser or approving screen recording. Guillaume showed that earlier with Swift Dialog. And we've thought about that too. So we are working on a new product or a new tool that kind of goes hand in hand with Setup Manager, but it's a separate thing. And the first thing that we did was, well, Apple has this nice welcome screen that comes in. It's nice, we all turn it off because we can't customize it. What if we could customize it? So we have a customized welcome screen. This is on Sequoia, but you can do the text whatever you want and the background however you want. When you hit continue, it goes into setup checklist. You can have some welcome screen. We have some branding here so the user can choose a wallpaper. I hope your branding department is more creative than me. We want to set a default browser. The user wants to be smart and says keep Safari, but then they can't continue. So they have to approve this and switch to use Edge. And then we guide the user towards enabling screen sharing. And when they continue there, then they're done. There's a whole list of things that we want to add to this, but this is like the basics that we're starting out with. It's not available yet. We are in the process of finishing the last touches and also getting the internal approvals and code reviews and all the things that we need to do before we can publish this. But I do hope that we can make this available pretty soon. It will start out with the full screen windows, images and movies to inform the user what's going on. They can choose the wallpaper, the default browser, the screen sharing. We can launch third-party apps and URLs so that these apps can start their own onboarding, first login workflow. We have more that we want to do, but that's what we're going to start out with. Oh, there should have been a coming soon here because it's not there yet, but we want to have that soon. So Setup Manager, yeah, we think it's the modern thing to use for enrollment. It's easier to configure, no shell script editing required. We have different workflows for zero touch and single touch, and it works with Jamf Pro and Jamf School. I'll accelerate through these. jamf.it/setup-manager. This will be on the screen for a while. And are there any questions? I was really fast.